One nun vanished the morning after a mysterious kitchen fire. No one questioned it until the principal found a burned file and a missing child's name crossed out in red. As old records resurface and a stranger claims to be the girl's father, a buried truth from a shuttered orphanage begins to claw its way back. What really happened to Anna, and who was Sister Eleanor protecting her from? The early morning light filtering through the windows of St. Mary's Preparatory School gave the illusion of normalcy, of yet another Thursday unfolding like countless others. The cafeteria staff were already clanking trays. The janitor was fixing a leaky pipe near the science wing, and Principal Mary Ann Foltz was reviewing the daily attendance chart in her office. She sipped her coffee, barely noticing the quiet hum of the radiators or the smell of floor polish lingering from the night crew. But something felt off. A strange tension hung in the air like static before a storm. It wasn't until 7:45 a.m.d. that the first crack in routine showed itself. Sister Eleanor Duval had not checked in. Sister Eleanor was never late. She was meticulous, almost obsessively so. A woman of routine, silence, and strict boundaries, she handled the second-grade class with a composed firmness, a faint accent suggesting a Midwest upbringing, and eyes that rarely blinked. When she was absent from the morning attendance log, Principal Foltz frowned. "Have you seen Sister Eleanor this morning?" she asked Margaret, the school secretary. Margaret shook her head. "No, and she didn't return her clipboard last night. That's not like her." Still, the day moved forward. Teachers filed in, students were ushered to class, but the unease grew heavier when Mrs. Hartman, the teacher covering early supervision in the hallway, mentioned that the kitchen had been locked unusually late last night, and there was a smell, smoke, faint but acrid, coming from the back corridor. Principal Foltz's worry morphed into urgency. She walked briskly toward the school's kitchen. Upon opening the heavy double doors, the scent struck her immediately. Something had burned. Inside, the stove was cold, but the charred remains of a manila folder sat in the sink. The edges of the paper were completely blackened, curled like old parchment. Only the metal clasp had survived. Foltz felt a jolt of alarm as she reached for the folder with a pen, lifting it carefully. A few words had survived the fire, faint but legible. She turned to Margaret. "Get maintenance, and find out who was on night duty yesterday. Check the logs." Minutes later, the logbook confirmed what she feared. Sister Eleanor had signed into the building at 6:43 p.m. and never signed out. A new worry emerged when they checked her assigned classroom. Everything appeared in order, chairs stacked, chalk dust still faintly visible on the board, but on the desk, neatly placed and addressed in Sister Eleanor's tiny slanted handwriting, was a sealed envelope. Principal Foltz tore it open. Inside was a single sentence written in ballpoint ink. "Forgive me. She cannot stay." No name, no further explanation. But taped beside the note was a key, the spare to the downstairs archive room, a place Sister Eleanor had access to but rarely visited. Something deeper was unraveling. Foltz took the key without a word and descended into the basement level, her shoes echoing down the concrete stairwell. She unlocked the archive door, stepped into the cool darkness, and flipped on the lights. Boxes lined the walls, labeled by year and class. One box sat oddly open on the center table. Its contents had been rifled through, some files missing entirely. It belonged to Class 2B, the same class Sister Eleanor taught. And worse, as Foltz sifted through what remained, she found that at least 3 students, Anna Louise, Kevin D., and Riley M., had no complete records remaining. Their birth certificates, guardianship forms, health records, gone. Margaret's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie Foltz carried. "Ma'am, we've tried calling Sister Eleanor's emergency contact. No answer, but the neighbor next to the sister's residence said they saw her walking down the road late last night with a suitcase and a little girl holding her hand." Foltz's breath caught. "Did they recognize the girl?" "Anna," she said. It was Anna. The phone lines buzzed with incoming messages. Parents were beginning to ask questions. A few students from 2B had whispered to aides that Miss Eleanor cried yesterday, something she had never done in front of children. By mid-noon, the authorities were involved. Police dusted the kitchen for fingerprints, secured the burnt folder, and began questioning staff. They labeled it a non-criminal disappearance for concern for minor safety, but behind closed doors they admitted what everyone feared. Sister Eleanor Duval had likely fled with a child under her care. As dusk fell over St. Mary's, Principal Foltz remained in her office. She reread Eleanor's note a dozen times. She tried to remember anything that could hint at this kind of behavior. But there was nothing. Sister Eleanor had been with the school 5 years, quiet, consistent, devoted, and now inexplicably gone with one of their most vulnerable students. That night, news began to spread. A staff WhatsApp group overflowed with speculation. Some cried, some were furious. Some, especially those who had once been close to Eleanor, simply refused to believe it. But one truth remained. Something had been erased, intentionally, and someone had been taken. Principal Marianne Foltz had always trusted her instincts, and they now screamed that this wasn't just a case of a nun losing her way or a teacher buckling under pressure. There was something deliberate, calculated in the way Sister Eleanor Duval had vanished with Anna. Sitting alone in Eleanor's modest office the morning after the incident, Marianne scanned every corner, her hands trembling only slightly. She opened every drawer, checked beneath the desk, behind the filing cabinet. Eleanor's desk was obsessively neat, too neat for someone who'd left in a rush. Nothing was left behind, save for a single torn news clipping wedged between the pages of a hymn book on the bookshelf. Marianne's pulse quickened as she unfolded the yellowing square of paper. The ink had faded with age, but the bold headline still echoed like a whisper from the past. Foster mother and girl missing from St. Agnes Youth Shelter, 10, 1997. File in small italic print was the subheading, Authorities baffled. No arrests. Facility under quiet scrutiny. Marianne blinked. St. Agnes. She whispered it aloud, tasting the name like poison. The article was brief, no more than 120 words. It stated that a 24-year-old foster child had disappeared overnight from a religious-run youth shelter in Madison, Wisconsin. No signs of struggle. The child's name, Emily D. The last person seen with her, the caretaker, referred to only as the young sister. Marianne's fingers tightened around the fragile paper. She had never heard Eleanor mention Wisconsin, let alone a place called St. Agnes. Why had this clipping been hidden inside a hymn book? And why keep it after all these years? A knock at the office door snapped her out of her thoughts. It was Mrs. Delaney, a teacher who had been at St. Mary's since its founding. She looked pale, shaken. "Principal Foltz," she said quietly, something's bothering me." Marianne motioned for her to come in. "You remember when Sister Eleanor first arrived here 5 years ago?" Mrs. Delaney began, settling into the seat across from her. "She was referred by the diocese, came with glowing reviews, but when we asked about her prior placements, she only said she served in various missions in the Midwest. No specifics, no details." Marianne nodded slowly. "That was odd to me too, but we didn't push. Her credentials were impeccable." Mrs. Delaney leaned in, lowering her voice. "I think she was at a youth facility, a religious shelter of some kind. I remember the name. It came up in conversation once, by accident." She dropped a folder, and inside I saw a label, St. Agnes Intake Records, 1996. She snatched it before I could read more. I didn't think anything of it until now. Marianne reached into her drawer, pulling out the torn news clipping. She passed it across the desk. Delaney's eyes scanned the article, her face draining of color. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Emily D? Could that be Anna?" Marianne shook her head. "No, Anna's birth records were supposedly from Michigan. This Emily disappeared in 1997. Anna is 8. It can't be the same girl." Delaney was silent a moment, then said, "But it could be Eleanor. She would have been about 24 in 1997. Marianne's heart pounded. That would mean Eleanor had a past hidden from everyone, and that she may not have been merely a nun, but a fugitive under an alias. She rose from the desk, suddenly needing fresh air. The hallway buzzed with children between classes, blissfully unaware of the cracks forming in the world around them. Eleanor had always walked these halls with an eerie calm. She was attentive to the children, but guarded, as if she lived in a different rhythm than the rest of them. The more Marianne thought about it, the clearer it became. Eleanor had always been hiding something. In the break room, Marianne sat beside the school chaplain, Father Lyle. She handed him the clipping. He read it, adjusted his glasses, and then let out a long breath. St. Agnes was closed down in '99. There were rumors, allegations of neglect. I was at seminary then, heard whispers. Some children got shuffled through fast, papers lost in the transfer, a few were never found. The diocese kept it quiet. Marianne asked softly, "Do you think Eleanor could have been involved?" Father Lyle hesitated. "If she was the caretaker who disappeared and reappeared years later under a different name, then yes. But she's been here 5 years. She's raised no red flags, until now." Marianne's gaze hardened, because she was waiting, preparing, planning. That afternoon, she called the local police and asked them to cross-reference Eleanor's fingerprints from her employment file with any unsolved cases in Wisconsin. The officer on the other end of the line promised to look into it. Meanwhile, Delaney dug up a photo, an old yearbook from 2018, the first year Eleanor had taught at St. Mary's. In the background of one picture, barely visible, was a child, a girl with the same eyes as Anna. "That's not Anna," Delaney whispered. "That's someone else. But she has the same necklace Anna wears now." Marianne looked closer. The necklace in the photo had a charm shaped like a small bird. Anna wore that every day. Outside, the fall wind was picking up. Leaves scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. Marianne stood at the window and looked out at the playground, watching the children run and laugh. One was missing now, taken by a woman none of them had ever truly known. But why? Why keep a decades-old clipping? Why disappear now, after 5 quiet years? Unless something from the past was coming back, something Eleanor feared more than being discovered. After her unsettling conversation with Father Lyle and the quiet, haunting reminder of that photo in the yearbook, Principal Marianne Foltz returned to her office and locked the door. She needed answers, tangible ones, not theories or implications, but hard, documented facts that could tell her who Anna was and, more importantly, why Sister Eleanor had taken her. She opened the school's electronic record system, her fingers steady despite the dread creeping through her spine. Searching for Anna Louise, she expected to find at least a basic profile, a birth certificate, immunization records, guardian contact, even a simple enrollment date. Instead, a single line appeared from St. Margaret's Orphan Center, Diocese of Madison, Wisconsin. That was it. No digital birth record, no social security number, no medical history, just that brief line and an admission date to St. Mary's, August 24th, 2021. Less than 2 years ago. Marianne leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen. That orphan center, St. Margaret's, was another religious institution under the same dioceses where the now-defunct St. Agnes had operated. She picked up her office phone for student records. "Yes, this is Principal Foltz from St. Mary's Prep. I need to confirm a student transfer," she said. The woman on the other end sounded accommodating, but confused. "She don't have any transfer documentation for that child," she said after several minutes. "If she came from a private institution, especially out of state, they're supposed to file a basic background packet. We have nothing on her, no state enrollment." "You're saying she doesn't exist in the public system?" Marianne asked, heart dropping. "Legally speaking," the woman replied carefully, "we can't confirm she ever attended a certified institution before yours." Back in the paper records room, Marianne began combing through hard copies of enrollment forms for the last 2 years. Tucked in a drawer labeled 2021 Incoming, she finally located a faded manila folder with a handwritten label, ANAL, authorizing herself as Educational Guardian for Minor under Provisional Clerical Supervision. The other was a single-page letter from a Reverend Thomas Bell dated from Madison, Wisconsin. It read, "To whom it may concern, the child Anna Louise has been placed under Sister Eleanor's supervision for religious and moral instruction. Further details available only upon request from diocesan authorities. Please direct any inquiries through Ecclesiastical Legal Counsel. No letterhead, no contact phone. Just an address that Marianne would later discover belonged to an abandoned church building." There was no indication of a birth mother, no medical authorization form, no legal custodian outside of Eleanor's own signature. Marianne stared at the paper. This wasn't a transfer. It was a smuggling operation dressed in clerical stationery. The silence in her office was broken by a knock. Mrs. Delaney stepped in, holding a red-inked roster sheet. "I didn't want to disturb you, but I thought you should see this," she said, laying the paper on Marianne's desk. It's last week's attendance sheet for Class 2B. I kept a printout because the system was glitching. Look. Marianne's eyes scanned the familiar grid of names and dates. Beside each name, black check marks indicated presence, but on Friday's column, the final name on the list had been struck through in bright red pen. "That's not a correction," Delaney whispered. "That's an erasure. Someone wanted her name removed." Marianne's breath hitched. The last name, Duval. Not just Anna Louise, but Anna Louise Duval. Did anyone know she shared the same last name as Eleanor?" Delaney hesitated. "I never saw it written out fully before. We always called her just Anna. But yes, it's the same. My God, if Marianne looked again at the signature on the earlier document, the same sweeping D in Duval that Eleanor always wrote, with her slight right-hand lean. Could Anna be her daughter? A niece? A girl she claimed as family in a way the law couldn't recognize? But if that was true, why hide it? Why bring her here under forged or incomplete records? Why now, after 5 years, decide to vanish? There was only one more thing Marianne could check, Eleanor's original employment packet. She opened the personnel cabinet and found it under D. The resume was simple: degrees in early childhood education and theology, a brief teaching stint in Chicago, then New Mexico, finally arriving at St. Mary's. But the reference letters all came from one diocese, Madison, and one name appeared multiple times: Reverend Thomas Bell. The same name on Anna's false transfer document, and then, at the back of the folder, was a photo ID from 2010, when Eleanor applied for a position at a Catholic summer camp. The photo was grainy, but in her lap sat a child, maybe 2 years old, with a small pendant around her neck. The same bird-shaped charm Anna wore every day. Marianne copied the photo, her hand steadier than she expected. She looked up at Delaney. "She's not a random child," she said quietly. "She's been with Eleanor for years." Delaney sat down slowly, the weight of the truth landing hard. "So, she's raised her in secret? Hidden her in plain sight, here at school?" Marianne nodded. "And she prepared this for months, maybe years. She waited until no one was looking, erased the enough ambiguity to buy time," Delaney whispered. "Why would someone do that?" Marianne didn't answer. She was already opening her laptop, her fingers moving quickly. There was one more file she hadn't checked yet, since Mary's staff emergency background summaries, stored offline. If Eleanor's file listed any relatives, it would be here. She clicked open the encrypted document, entered her passcode, and searched E. Eleanor Duval. And then the name appeared. Emergency kin, 1997, presumed missing. Principal Marianne Foltz had barely begun to process the revelation that Eleanor listed a missing sister, Emily Duval, as her emergency contact, when her office phone rang again. She answered absent-mindedly, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "Principal Foltz speaking," she said. On the other end was Helen Morris, a parent of a student in Class 2B and known in the community for her over-involvement in school affairs. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just heard about Sister Eleanor and Anna, and something's been bothering me," Helen said. Marianne straightened. "Go ahead," Helen hesitated. "It's probably nothing, but I walk my dog around the school every night around 11 or so. It's part of my routine. And I've seen Sister Eleanor going in and out of the side entrance after hours, not just once, multiple times over the last few months." "What was she doing?" Marianne asked carefully. "She always carried this large canvas bag, like laundry, but I swear it was heavy. She'd struggle with it a bit. I thought she was just doing school cleaning or organizing, but it never sat right. I didn't want to be rude or question a nun." Marianne's fingers drummed against the desk. "Did you ever mention this to anyone?" "No," Helen admitted. "But last week, the night before the fire, I saw her again. She was walking faster than usual, and I'm sure there was someone small walking behind her. I couldn't see clearly, but it looked like a child." "What time was that?" "A little after midnight," Helen said. "She went in through the faculty side entrance, that one by the maintenance yard." After ending the call, Marianne moved quickly. She knew that entrance. It led directly to the basement hallway, which connected the archive room and the kitchen. If Eleanor had been using that route regularly, there had to be some record, though their primary camera system was only recently upgraded and didn't cover all the old wings. Still, she remembered an ancient wall-mounted security camera at that side entrance, installed years ago, and mostly forgotten. It stored footage on a local DVR that had to be accessed manually. Mary Ann hurried to the IT room, and after nearly an hour of digging through aging cables and backup systems, she found the DVR. The dusty device blinked to life when plugged into the nearest monitor. It had footage stored in 2-second intervals, grainy and black and white, with timestamps overlaying each frame. She scrolled to the night Helen had described, 2 nights before. Midnight. Nothing at first, just the occasional flicker from the street lamp and a raccoon near the dumpster. But at 12:08 a.m., a figure appeared. Mary Ann leaned forward. It was Eleanor, unmistakably in her gray habit, head covered, walking briskly toward the side door. Slung over her shoulder was a large cloth bag. Behind her was a small girl in a hoodie, Anna, without question. They both entered the building, and the footage ended. No exit was recorded. Mary Ann fast-forward, there were no other movements recorded from that entrance for the next 10 hours. They never came back out, but there was more. Curious, she began checking previous nights. The same pattern emerged, Eleanor entering alone or with a bag every few days for nearly 6 weeks. Sometimes she carried a flashlight. Once, she appeared to be dragging a small wheeled suitcase. Each time, no one else was visible. Mary Ann took a shaky breath and clicked to download the most recent video to a thumb drive. She knew she would need to give it to the authorities, but she wasn't ready yet. She needed to understand what Eleanor had been preparing for and why. Later that day, she summoned Martin Kowalski, the school's longest-serving janitor. He had keys to every room and had been working nights since 1998. When asked if he'd noticed Eleanor in the building late at night, Martin shrugged. "Well, she's a nun. I figured she was praying or doing paperwork." "In the archive room?" Mary Ann pressed. He paused. "Once or twice I saw light under the door when I came to mop the floors, but I didn't question it." "Did she ever leave anything behind?" "No, but now that you mention it, the floor in the old supply closet next to the archive saw weird recently, like someone had dragged something heavy across it." By that evening, Mary Ann had one more call to make. She contacted Officer Ramirez, the local detective assigned to the case. She handed him the footage, the transfer documents, the redacted attendance sheet, and a printed image from the grainy video of Eleanor and Anna entering the building. "We have reason to believe she'd been planning this for weeks," Mary Ann said, "and she's been using access points and hours that no one monitors." Ramirez flipped through the papers, his face harkening. "We'll open a formal investigation. This stops being a missing persons case when a child is removed from school grounds under false pretense." But Mary Ann wasn't finished. She returned to the faculty logbook, a battered red journal kept at the front desk. It documented who entered and exited the school after hours, manually, of course. She flipped to the week of the fire. Eleanor had signed in Wednesday night at 6:43 p.m., as noted earlier. But on Thursday, nothing. No sign out, no new sign in yet the camera proved she had been inside past midnight. And then, a subtle detail chilled her. In the margin of the Thursday logbook page, someone had scribbled something faint and later erased. With the help of a flashlight at an angle, Mary Ann could just make out the indentation. It said, A.L.L., Anna Louise Duval. What did she mean by final lesson? Why take Anna now? Where had she been going those nights with the bags, the secrecy? And what had been in the suitcase? 2 days after the fire, while the police were still gathering statements and security footage, the fire department returned to St. Mary's to complete their official damage assessment. Though the blaze had been small and localized, isolated to the sink area in the kitchen, protocol demanded a full sweep to determine if arson or accident had been involved. Chief Inspector Warner, a man with 22 years of service and a well-earned reputation for catching the details others missed, moved through the scene with careful eyes. The stainless steel sink, scorched and blackened, had already yielded the remains of a manila folder, but something about the drainage area caught his attention. Tucked against the pipe joint, wedged just enough to avoid falling into the trap below, was a metal object. Warner bent down and used a gloved hand to pry it free. The item was a cross, a simple silver-toned crucifix no longer than 4 inches in height, tarnished and heat-stained, but surprisingly intact. He turned it over and noticed that the back had a small clasp. Curious, he flipped the latch. To his surprise, the crucifix split open, not broken, but designed that way. Inside, instead of the expected relic or religious quote, was a folded, curled photograph. Carefully, he used tweezers to remove it and placed it into a sealed evidence bag. Later that afternoon, the photo was delivered to Principal Mary Ann Foltz, along with the inspector's brief report. Found hidden within metastic religious item in fire site. Contains vintage photo, possible personal significance. Mary Ann sat alone in her office as she opened the envelope. The photograph, though heat-warped and brown-edged, was surprisingly well preserved. It showed a young girl, perhaps 4 or 5, standing in front of what looked like a playground. Her expression was solemn. Her eyes, wide and dark, stared directly into the camera. Her hair was in loose pigtails, and she wore a cardigan that looked... But what struck Mary Ann wasn't just the haunting gaze. It was the necklace hanging from the girl's neck, the tiny, bird-shaped charm, the same one Anna wore. Mary Ann flipped the photo over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were the initials ALD, followed by a dash and the word Madison, and then a year, 2012. Mary Ann froze. 2012 was the year the St. Agnes facility had officially closed after a wave of quiet allegations, whistleblowers, anonymous reports, and ultimately the disappearance of several staff and wards had led to a Diosop's inquiry and silent shutdown. The building had been sold and left abandoned. If this girl was A.L. Lewis Duval, then she would have been roughly 3 or 4 years old in 2012. That aligned with Anna's current age, if not perfectly, then eerily close. But what unsettled Mary Ann even more was the implication of this being hidden. Why place a photo inside a crucifix and then set fire to the folder it may have been associated with? It wasn't random. It was ritualistic, intentional. Mary Ann called Father Lyle once more and asked him to come to her office immediately. When he arrived, she handed him the image, then the writing, then sat down slowly. "This is not something most people would carry casually," he said. "A locket or photo maybe, but this, hidden in a cross, in a fire, someone wanted to destroy it or hide it forever." "Do you recognize the child?" Mary Ann asked. Father Lyle squinted. "I can't say I do, but the initials, ALLD, if that's Anna Louise Duval, and this is from 2012, then she wasn't transferred here in 2021 as claimed. She's been with Eleanor for much longer." Mary Ann nodded. "And not legally, as far as we can tell. There's no adoption paperwork, no custody orders, and Eleanor's signature. It gets worse," Lyle murmured. "Madison's diocesan archives show St. Agnes still under ecclesiastical seal. No one outside Vatican legal has access without clearance. If Eleanor got that child out during the scandal, she likely did it without approval." "Or she took her because she thought no one else would," Mary Ann said grimly. Later that evening, Mary Ann returned to the damaged kitchen. The scorched metal, the faint smell of ash, it all felt strangely sacred now, like the scene of a confession left unfinished. She knelt by the sink, staring at the drain where the crucifix had been wedged. What had Eleanor been doing here that night? Burning a file, making peace with something, or burying the last trace of a secret too large for words? She stood and turned to leave, but noticed a small drawer left ajar beneath the food prep counter. Curious, she pulled it open. Inside was a folded paper towel, wrapped tightly. She unrolled it and discovered a small, charred corner of another photograph. Only a fragment remained, just the edge of a smiling mouth and a pair of fingers holding what looked like a rosary. Another piece of the same child, or someone else. She placed it carefully in her coat pocket. Back in her office, Marian called the fire department again. Chief Warner answered. "You didn't happen to see anything else in the debris? Any other objects?" "Just that crucifix," he replied. "Why?" "Because I think it's part of something bigger," she said. "There's more buried in this place than soot and paperwork." After ending the call, she stared again at the photograph. A.L.L. Madison, 2012. If Anna had been there, if she'd come from that world, then Eleanor had not kidnapped a child, she'd been protecting one. But from what? Or who? And why now, after 10 years of hiding, had it all resurfaced? The quiet of Friday morning was broken by the unexpected presence of a visitor in the front office lobby of St. Mary's. Mary Ann was reviewing the fire inspection report when Margaret, the school secretary, knocked and leaned in with a note of concern in her voice. "There's a man asking to speak with you. He says it's urgent. Did he give a name?" "Gregory Stanek," Margaret replied. "He wouldn't sit down. Said he has a right to know what's going on with his daughter." The words hit Marianne like a jolt. "Did he say daughter?" "Yes," Margaret nodded, lowering her voice. "He said Anna Duval is his child." Marianne stood slowly and walked toward the front lobby with the cautious resolve of someone who had already begun connecting invisible threads. The man standing near the receptionist's desk was in his mid-50s, tall and sunburnt, with a weather-beaten face and gray stubble. He wore a wrinkled denim shirt and work boots as though he'd just stepped off a construction site. His eyes were sharp, and they fixed on Marianne the moment she entered the room. "You're the principal?" he asked. "I am," she said calmly. "You're here about Anna?" "That's right," he said. "I'm her father, Gregory Stanek. I need to know where she is." Marianne took a slow breath. "Do you have any documentation proving custody or paternity?" "No," he said, unflinching. "But that girl is mine. I've been looking for her for years. I know who took her. I know Eleanor Duval." Marianne's hands remained at her sides. "Then you also know Eleanor disappeared earlier this week with Anna." "That's why I'm here," he said, stepping forward slightly. "She ran. Again. I told the diocese years ago this would happen, and nobody listened. That child was taken from me." "We'll need more than your word, Mr. Stanek," Marianne said coolly. "Do you know where Anna came from originally?" Gregory's jaw clenched. "She was born at St. Agnes. I was staff there, administration. My name wasn't on her birth certificate, but I helped raise her. I had every right to see her. Until Eleanor decided she knew better. Until she took her and vanished. 10 years, he said. Until they shut us down in 2012. Lies and rumors. That place was good. We helped kids. We gave them homes." Marianne kept her voice steady. "Your name wasn't listed in any of the documents Eleanor provided, and Anna was enrolled here under a transfer from Wisconsin." "That's because Eleanor forged it," Gregory snapped. "Created a false paper trail. She always had a savior complex. Thought she could rescue kids from the world. I'm not surprised she ended up pulling something like this. But that girl isn't hers. She's mine." Later that afternoon, after Gregory had left under the watch of Officer Ramirez, who took down his name and contact, Marianne began to dig. She contacted an old contact in the Wisconsin Child Welfare Department and asked for any public records related to Gregory Stanek. The reply came swiftly and with enough weight to make Marianne's hands shake. Gregory Stanek had been investigated in 2013 for suspected child endangerment and emotional abuse involving minors under his care at St. Agnes. The investigation never led to formal charges due to lack of conclusive evidence, but a recommendation had been made: Mr. Stanek should not hold unsupervised authority over children again. Attached to the file was a note. Subject maintained deep ties to several undocumented transfers and community programs tied to shelter activity between 20092012. One complaint mentioned a girl named Anna. Marianne stared at the name, Anna Lou, a diminutive of Anna Louise. There it was, in black and white. Gregory had known her, had been in her life, but whether he was her father, a guardian, or something else entirely was still uncertain. What was clear was that his involvement with Eleanor and St. Agnes hadn't ended when the shelter closed. It had merely gone underground. She forwarded the file to Officer Ramirez immediately. An hour later, Ramirez called her back. "You were right to be cautious," he said. "Gregory Stanek is on our watch list now. He's connected to multiple facilities across the Midwest that had questionable reputations, and I just spoke with a former caseworker from the diocese who confirmed something chilling. Stanek was more than staff. He was close to the leadership, he had influence, and Eleanor, she filed a formal complaint against him back in 2011. Said he was threatening girls, manipulating placement decisions. That complaint disappeared, but the timing lines up exactly with when she vanished with Anna." Marianne sat back, stunned. "So she may have taken Anna to protect her from him?" "That's what it looks like," Ramirez said, "but now he's resurfaced, and if he's looking for her again, it's because he knows something's unraveling." Marianne stood and walked to her window. The wind outside pushed dried leaves across the pavement like restless thoughts. Somewhere Anna was out there, and so was Eleanor. Running not just from the law, but from a past tied to this man who had come uninvited, unannounced, with a claim and no proof. But proof wasn't the only thing he lacked. He had no warmth in his eyes when he said Anna's name. He had no sorrow in his voice when he spoke of the years without her. He only had possession. And that, Marianne knew, was never the same as love. The revelation about Gregory Stanek had pushed everything into a darker frame, one where the lines between savior and fugitive blurred more by the hour. Marianne couldn't stop replaying his words, the cold certainty with which he claimed Anna as his own, the complete absence of anything resembling paternal warmth. And yet, what struck her most was how confidently he had spoken about Eleanor, like someone who had known her for years, who had watched her from too close a distance. That same evening, Officer Ramirez called her again. "We've been combing through the old diocesan archives you forwarded," he said. "Most of them are incomplete or mislabeled, probably intentional. But today we found something big." Marianne held her breath. "Go on." "It's a file that was mislabeled under an outdated code, 1997, marked as deferred cases or FENS, but it's actually a post-incident intake form. Subject, Eleanor Duval, not as a staff member, as a ward." Marianne went cold. "You're saying she was a child from St. Agnes?" "Yes," Ramirez confirmed. She was admitted in August 1997 after a disappearance involving her and her older sister, Emily. According to the document, both girls went missing from a group excursion. Eleanor was recovered 2 weeks later, found wandering near a rest stop over 40 miles away. Emily was never found. Eleanor was placed back into the system quietly, her file sealed due to psychological trauma and potential legal complications surrounding the shelter's role in the disappearance. She was the surviving child, Marianne whispered. All this time, Ramirez continued. "That's not all. There was a note attached to the sealed file, a single line, potential pregnancy at time of disappearance, Emily D., unconfirmed." That would align with Anna's birth year. Marianne's knees weakened and she sank into her chair. "Are you saying Anna is Eleanor's niece?" Ramirez said. "Her sister's daughter. The child born shortly before or after Emily vanished. It would explain Eleanor's actions, why she took the child, why she changed her name, forged documents, erased trails. She wasn't stealing someone else's child, she was protecting what little family she had left." The weight of the revelation settled like stone across Marianne's chest. Eleanor hadn't been acting out of guilt or paranoia. She had been surviving, repeating a pattern of protection born from childhood trauma, reliving the disappearance of her sister by trying to save her sister's child from the same fate. And in that context, everything made a painful, heartbreaking kind of sense. Later that night, Marianne requested access to the diocese's confidential adoption and guardianship records, hoping for a match that could definitively prove Anna's parentage. The reply came 3 hours later from a sympathetic clerical officer. One scanned birth record from a closed Madison clinic dated October 2012. The name of the mother was redacted, but the child's name read clearly. No father listed. Hospital records showed the birth had been referred to clerical custody due to absent parental guardian. The attending note mentioned private transfer, Sister Eleanor D. It was all there, hidden in outdated codes, misspelt labels, deliberate vagueness. The past had never truly disappeared. It had been buried, rewritten, folded into rituals and roles and new names. But now it was surfacing, and with it the unhealed scar of a little girl lost in 1997 and the woman she grew up to be, still searching for the sister who had vanished beside her. By the end of the week, Principal Marianne Foltz no longer doubted that the story she thought she was unraveling had become something much larger, larger than Eleanor, larger than St. Mary's, larger even than the tragedy of Anna's vanishing. She had just received a copy of Eleanor's work laptop from the IT department. Although it was password protected, their network administrator had already unlocked it at the request of Officer Ramirez. Most of the files were mundane, lesson plans, attendance spreadsheets, and internal communication. But buried inside a hidden folder named Vespers was a document simply titled Arc List. Marian opened it. The file was unlike anything she expected. It wasn't about St. Mary's or the diocese. It was a spreadsheet of names, children's names, all female, all aged between 5 and 13. Each line had a first name, a single letter for the last name, a year of birth, and then a column labeled facility. The facilities were familiar in a haunting way. St. Bridget's Home, Haven Light Academy, the Redeemer's Pathway, names that sounded wholesome but, when cross-correct, were all tied to religious-run youth shelters scattered across multiple states. Each row had a curbed co-tag, green for confirmed, yellow for pending, and red for extra. Anna's name was the very last one. Her row was marked in bold, red. The final column read, Status Out, /12. April 12th. The night Eleanor disappeared. Marianne stared at the screen in silence. The pattern was undeniable. This was a list of children Eleanor believed were in danger, or being silenced, or hidden, and she had been moving through them one by one, identifying, confirming, and somehow removing them from the network. She called Officer Ramirez again. "I found a file," she said. "It's not just about Anna, it's about other girls, dozens of them. She was trying to get them out." Ramirez was quiet for a moment before responding. "Send it to me immediately. I'll forward it to the federal unit. If this is what it looks like, it's a coordinated operation. Possibly interstate? How long do you think she's been doing this?" Marianne asked. "Long enough," Ramirez replied grimly. "And it's likely Anna was the last one." As they worked through Eleanor's emails, another thread emerged. A correspondence folder marked BC, Beatrice, Collins, dozens of messages, most cryptic and brief. Beatrice appeared to be an ally, someone Eleanor trusted deeply. They had coordinated several placements together, using coded language, phrases like morning light, or after Vesper bell, or 3 keys, 1 gate. But one message stood out. It was dated just days before the fire. The subject line was empty. The body read simply, "Anna's beginning to remember. She called the name. She said, Madison. She dreams of the red hallway and the locked door. I think she's starting to put it together. We don't have much time left." Marianne read the line again, her eyes catching on the crucifix. The background had been nondescript, but yes, faintly behind the girl was a wall with peeling red paint. Could it be the hallway from the old St. Agnes facility? Had Anna been there before? Had she been hidden there as an infant, or born in one of the back rooms before her mother vanished? The implication hit hard. Anna wasn't just the key to Eleanor's past, she carried a piece of the truth inside her. A truth that was starting to surface even without Eleanor's prompting. Dreams, names, triggers. Children remembered things even if they didn't understand them. And if Eleanor knew Anna was starting to recall what had happened at St. Agnes, that meant someone else might have been watching too. Beatrice's last reply read, "Do it before they find you. We'll meet at 3rd bell. Use the north route." Marianne called Ramirez again and forwarded the emails. Within the hour, the name Beatrice Collins had been matched to a former nurse practitioner who had worked briefly at a Nevada youth shelter, later shuttered after malpractice claims. She had vanished from public record 3 years ago. No note address. No digital footprint. But here she was, helping Eleanor. Together, they had built something underground. Not a conspiracy. A rescue. And Anna had been the last name on the list. It had been nearly 10 days since Eleanor and Anna vanished from St. Mary's, and despite the growing web of revelations, no one had seen them, until now. Officer Ramirez called Marianne on a rainy Tuesday morning, urgency in his voice. "We just got confirmation from federal surveillance at the southern border," he said. "A security camera from an ATM in Laredo, Texas, captured a transaction made with a card registered to Eleanor Duval. The timestamp is 3:42 a.m. on April 13th. "That's the night after the fire," Marianne replied, standing immediately. "Exactly," Ramirez said. "And she wasn't alone." The still image sent to her email moments later was grainy, taken in low light, but it was unmistakable. Eleanor stood at the ATM in a long coat, her head covered with a scarf. She was hunched slightly, shielding the keypad, but beside her was a child, small, pale, wearing a blue hoodie and clinging to Eleanor's coat pocket. Anna, Her face was passionately turned away from the camera, but the bird-shaped pendant gleamed faintly under the machine's light. Marianne felt her chest tighten. "Where exactly is the ATM?" she asked. "Corner of Calais Rivera and Maine, not far from the border checkpoint. But here's the thing. We checked local properties rented under aliases linked to Eleanor's past employment, and we got a hit. A temporary lease taken out 4 weeks ago under the name Elaine Duran. The unit's only 5 blocks from the ATM. We raided it this morning." Marianne waited in silence, heart racing. Ramirez continued. "The apartment was empty when we got there. No signs of a struggle, no fresh belongings. But it was definitely used recently. We found evidence of someone living, light and mobile, portable water filters, dry food packets, burner phone chargers, and on the main table, left deliberately, was a file folder. Its labels in Eleanor's handwriting, The Girls of St. Agnes, Truth Must Be Carried. The file was hand-delivered to Marianne by early afternoon. She sat alone in her office and opened it with reverence. Inside were nearly 20 profiles, each bearing the name of a girl, some from the ARC list, others unfamiliar. Each entry contained details: last known location, suspected abuser or overseer, institutional affiliations. Some included photos, others only sketches or written descriptions. One file read, "Lydia H.E., age 11, placed in Redeemer's Haven under Father Kelman, frequent night terrors, withdrawn, suspected sedatives administered." Another read, "Marta B., age 6, transferred twice in 2019, showed signs of trauma consistent with confinement." At the very back was Anna's file. It was the thickest. Eleanor had compiled medical records, drawings, statements Anna made in sleep or during panic spells. One page was a child's crayon sketch of a red hallway with a large black door at the end. In shaky handwriting, Anna had labeled it, "The Place with No Windows." The folder also contained the photo from the crucifix, labeled this time with fuller writing. Below that, a final line, "She carries memory through dream. She must reach Beatrice." Marianne sat motionless. Eleanor hadn't run. She hadn't disappeared in panic. She had orchestrated the entire exit, timed, calculated, and focused on one final act: delivering Anna to safety. Delivering the truth. He forwarded everything to Ramirez. Moments later, he called again. "We now believe Eleanor had a network of safe houses, temporary leases acquired months in advance, each used only once. We've cross-referenced 4 addresses with the previous girls on the ARC list, all line up with ATM withdrawals or short bus fare charges. She's been moving across states like a smuggler, but what she's trafficking isn't contraband. It's children." He hesitated. "And there's something else. The ATM footage includes a 5-second clip after the transaction. Eleanor turns slightly and puts her hand on Anna's shoulder. Anna is crying. Eleanor kneels, wipes her tears, and says something. We can't hear it, but the motion is unmistakable. It's comfort. It's tenderness. "'Twas provoked, Jack," Tango said. She was the shield. It was exactly 1 week after the discovery of the empty apartment and the file labeled "The Girls of St. Agnes" when the call came. Officer Ramirez was already waiting in Marianne's office when the secure line from Interpol connected. On the screen appeared a Canadian liaison officer, his expression solemn but calm. "We believe we've found him," he said. "A woman and a young girl arrived 2 nights ago at a refugee center in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, Quebec. They requested asylum, citing persecution tied to systemic abuse in U.S. religious institutions. Their names were not on any registry, but both matched photo IDs forwarded through your task force." He clicked and 2 images filled the screen. Eleanor, her face tired, hair cut short, no longer in the habit but unmistakable, eyes still lined to the weight of sleepless decision. Beside her, Anna, bundled in an oversized coat, clinging tightly to Eleanor's hand, her face turned to the side, but the familiar pendant still visible around her neck. "They're currently under protective supervision," the officer continued. "The local authorities have confirmed their identities, and the woman has requested to speak only with UN refugee officials. She claims she fears extradition would return the child to an environment of systemic harm." Ramirez didn't speak for a long moment. Marianne's voice broke the silence. She made it deep into the case procedures. For now, they are safe. Later that afternoon, as clouds rolled across the campus like a slow breath, Margaret stepped into Marianne's office with a puzzled look. "This came in the mail today," she said, holding a thick manila envelope with no return address. Mary Ann opened it gently. Inside was a single letter, handwritten in deep blue ink, along with a small pendant chain, the same bird charm Anna always wore. The letter was addressed to St. Mary's faculty and those who listened. She read aloud, "You may be told I fled, that I disappeared into the night with a child who wasn't mine. But I was never running from justice. I was running toward it, toward something purer than what this world kept building around those girls. I am not a kidnapper. I am someone who was once consumed by the same hunger that circled Anna. The kind of hunger that speaks in sermons, cloaks itself in charity, and feeds on silence. I escaped it once, barely, dragging myself from the mouth of that machine in 1997. I saw what it did to Emily, what it wanted to do to her child. I spent my life trying to forget, but forgetting only allowed it to feed again. So I remembered. And I carried those memories like salt in a wound until I found them. Each girl trapped in a system that preached salvation but offered no voice, no exit, only obedience. Anna was the last, and she was the most sacred, because she remembered too, not in words, not clearly, but in drawings, in questions, in nightmares. She knew the hallway. She felt the lock. She remembered Madison. I couldn't let that be swallowed again. You may never hear from us. That's the safest outcome. But if you do, I hope it's not through a headline. I hope it's because the truth finally surfaced where it could breathe, where it could heal. Tell the girls still there they're not forgotten. Tell them someone saw and carried. Mary Ann lowered the letter. Ramirez stood without a word and stepped out into the hallway, needing air. The room felt different now. Not haunted, not tense, but holy. The silence that followed wasn't the absence of sound, it was reverence. Days passed, then weeks. The diocese released a statement acknowledging past failures and announcing a review of affiliated shelters. Media outlets picked up pieces of the story, but no one had the full scope. They couldn't. Eleanor had made sure of that. The children on the ARC list vanished into new homes, new guardianships, through Beatrice's network. Most would never know what happened behind those doors. Maybe that was mercy. One evening, Mary Ann stood at the back of the now open chapel and watched a new group of second graders recite their spring verses. The rows were full again, the building quiet once more, but something lingered in the stained glass light, a presence not fearful but defiant, like Eleanor's shadow still keeping vigil. On her desk, beside a framed photo of the faculty, she placed the bird pendant. No plaque, no explanation, just the charm. And the truth it carried. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next mystery. Which moment hit you the hardest? And where do you think Elena and Anna are now? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from.